Two people, different backgrounds, in an environment of conflict, coming together and ultimately becoming friends. It's a simple story. But I think that there are major issues, but very complex issues behind it as well.
Reconciliation is a highly personal, individual kind of experience. What is real is friendship. And that cannot be explained in terms of some Judeo-Christian philosophy.
If reconciliation is a form of process, if it's a growing together in terms of some objective which we're working towards, and that is defined as reconciliation, then I think we live and breathe it on a regular basis.
The early 90s in South Africa was a really strange time. Optimism about the country's transformation was being severely undermined by rampant violence across the country. This is a film about reconciliation between two enemies, spies who preferred to be known as intelligence operatives, who not only reconciled, but formed a most unlikely friendship that saved many lives. Gordon, who still serves the state as a senior officer in intelligence coordination, started out as a covert agent for the security branch. Jeremy, raised in the gang-ridden Cape Flats outside Cape Town, joined the ANC and later was an operative of their Department of Intelligence and Security, the DIS. He now serves as a senior policeman. This is their story.
I sat with one of two choices. I either had to go into the army for 2 years, where I'd earn, I think it was then 30 Rand a month, or I went into policing for 4 years, but I'd earn the amorphous amount of 120 Rand a month. I joined in 1979, and after a year, was approached at that stage in terms of going into the security branch. The suggestion was put to me from the intelligence section of the security branch that they would facilitate my coming down to Rhodes so that I could do theology.
I became involved with the school structures during that period, and I think that is also partly a process that sort of made me think broader than just my own personal interests, but look at the political position we were finding ourselves in at the time, etc.
My target area was always accessing various black groupings, particularly on the left wing, and it covered everything. You just went boo relative to the state, and we monitored you.
What was the attraction? The power that it gave you?
I don't think it was power. I don't think it was ideological motivation. I don't think it was politically inspired. It was an option. It was interesting, and it appeared exciting. And I got drawn into it.
You were making friends and then betraying people.
It's the only issue at a personal level which has always concerned me, where I networked, got involved with, and made extremely good friends. And I think a fair number of them were compromised as a consequence of the professional work which I was doing. It was my job.
The other thing, a person who played a major role was my mother, because my mother had a strange way of politically educating me. I mean, she was a factory worker in the clothing industry. She was involved in the unions and those kind of things, and she regularly would explain these things to me and what it was about. I became a teacher in 1985. And in August 1987, I got arrested out of my classroom.
But in terms of the political direction that you took, tell us why you gravitated towards MK.
Yeah, I was never a person for mass front politics. I preferred, the covert forms of organization, underground form of organization. And a friend of mine recruited me into MK. We got involved in quite a few activities, etc. Some of it we were sentenced for, others we were not, so we would not go into those details.
When people picked up, tortured, and you knew them intimately, you knew their weak points, and they were particularly vulnerable because of what you knew about them.
I don't know of any individual during my time period as an infiltration agent who was arrested and interrogated merely based on the information which I had provided.
So the issue of culpability doesn't concern you?
Culpability in what respect?
For actions that led to torture, detention, deaths of others?
No. No, not at all. I think the nature of the system was such that investigative processes resulted, as they should, through intelligence initiatives. So there's a collateral association. But I think that's the society in which we existed at that stage.
You're talking in abstractions, collateral damage. It sounds as though you're not talking about real people.
What's the point in relation to what we're discussing?
I'm talking about ordinary people, flesh and blood. You're talking about collateral responsibility. You're talking at quite an abstract level.
I think individual culpability really doesn't enter into the picture in that kind of environment unless some of us did things that were grossly outside of organization's policy. Certain initiatives were undertaken to ensure that the enemy is neutralized, and it was a body corporate responsibility. Because we're not talking about individual initiative acts here.
We both come from a background where it's very difficult to talk to some of the work which we were involved in. To the extent that even our wives, mine in particular, I'm sure it's the same with Jeremy, when we reflect on what we were saying in relation to making this documentary, they will pose the question, why have you never said that to me? But it's not that we haven't discussed it with our wives. We've discussed it with nobody.
After 3 years, his cover blown, Gordon left university, but continued to work for the security branch as a spy handler overseas. During the same period, Jeremy was arrested and imprisoned for terrorism, following the security forces' successful compromising of the ANC's infiltration routes.
When I had arrived at Covert, I was shocked to see some of my comrades were already there. And I was also shocked at the extent of knowledge that the enemy had about me.
I was still running networks to infiltrate the ANC, the PAC, the extreme right wing, anything which threatened the state. But I started to also see that the pressure was on in terms of the state. That the state ultimately had to start buying in to some of the agendas of those who we were targeting.
Initially imprisoned at Cape Town's Pollsmoor prison, Jeremy was transferred to the notorious jail on Robben Island.
When you come here, at the stage that I came here, the enemy is monolithic. It's defined abstractly, and you fight it as a broad categorical kind of phenomena that you're experiencing. Down here, you learn to see difference. You learn to analyze the enemy much more particularly. And I think that was quite important to me when I came outside, and also important as an operative. I needed to understand, if I just look at fighting the branch, for example, it would have been, if I needed to recruit in that environment, if I needed to neutralize in that environment, I needed to understand people, the enemy, much more intimately. I learned to see grey before I saw black and white. Down here, we discussed it. We knew about the National Security Management System. We knew about John McEwen's theory of counter-revolutionary warfare, which the enemy was mistakenly, from a tactical perspective, believing to be a reality, despite the fact that the scenarios he used as examples are all cases where they lost.
While South Africa was desperately seeking political reconciliation, the country was being racked by violence. A total onslaught approach by pro-apartheid security forces fueled the black-on-black carnage. Armed ANC combatants were returning to safe areas all over the country, like Site B Khayelitsha in the Western Cape. The apartheid state security forces infiltrated Site B, fostering the killing, which spiraled to the point where it endangered a political settlement. And long-standing enemies, filled with hatred and mistrust for each other, had to engage.
And the reason I came back to South Africa was because the writing was on the wall in terms of change of systems internally as well. And so I was brought back into the country. And then the challenge was in terms of how to engage processes. Now we were meeting them face to face, and it became like a game of cards in terms of who would finesse who, where, when.
The National Directorate of DIS gave us an instruction to address certain problems together with certain members of the CIS, of the enemy. Site B conflict in Khayelitsha, we had our own agents in there, they had their own agents in there, and we were involved in a battle in trying to neutralize each other's agents.
At a very personal level, the engagement was very necessary. At a macro national level, the engagement was sanctioned. So we had to engage.
In the meantime, the rest of us, ordinary civilians, were being told about a third force. The newspapers were crying out about a third force. The third force was you guys playing games?
No. There was a fifth column active. I'll use an example. In the crime intelligence environment, Gordon replacing the head of the Covert unit of crime intelligence in this province was as a consequence of that previous head being involved in destabilizing operations in Khayelitsha, in the taxi situation, and trying to destabilize the ANC. Okay. And it was felt at the time, Gordon doesn't know that, this chap was given, someone went to his office one day, a senior commissioner, and told him, listen, pack your bags, move immediately, together with this team, and they identified 6 other people who had to move immediately and go and start entirely outside the CIS at a station. They were thrown out, literally. Those were the people who were busy with third force activities. The euphoria that everybody experienced after the unbanning and the release was not a reality to us. To me. A lot of us thought now the Boers will really, the enemy will really target us. And communists were eliminated. A lot of the guys I shared these cells with, man. Off my head, I can think of about 5 were killed. We're talking within 2 months after the release. Chap has been here probably for 8 or 10 years. He comes out of prison. I think the best part of the life he probably sees before he dies is his welcoming party in the community. After that, he's eliminated. So the best comfort for me was go back into the organization. Don't have a gap in between. Go back to the underground environment, go back to the intelligence environment of the ANC, continuing the war. That was it.
After his release, Jeremy was sent to the UK, Canada, and Zimbabwe for further intelligence training, and upon returning to South Africa, was deployed by the DIS.
And one is especially suspicious of this overt openness, you know. They're looking for motives, you know. I mean, it was a very difficult thing for us to do, to go and meet with the enemy and address the problem inside B together.
I still have images in my mind of Jeremy walking into some forms of engagement which we had on a one-to-one basis. Normally it had to be public forums because I didn't want to be compromised as being a lackey of the DIS as a potential recruited source, nor did he. So we'd meet in public forums so everybody could see us there. He would arrive with this trench coat. I still cannot work out how he considered a bar counter like that, with a trench coat, shotgun under the trench coat. How he was going to pull it out and shoot anybody, let alone me, I still don't know. He's still got to try to explain that modus operandi to me. But that was where we were still doing something, but there was also in the back of our minds this, I don't know if I'm going to come out of it in the end, at 2 levels. One, get shot up by them. At another level, they could compromise me.
I had no problem in the beginning with there being guns here.
Deployed on all of the dunes in close proximity were individuals from within this local community with their AK-47s against the police coming in, first of all, but also against the other section of the community which they were at loggerheads with.
This was our base. They were the enemy.
Arriving, not being able to hide behind my anonymous identity in terms of being an infiltration agent, I arrived with an actual identity of being a member of the South African police at the time, where members of the local community didn't trust us, period.
We were going to get peace here, as part of some common purpose, but not at the cost of losing our base. Not at the cost of losing our capacity to defend ourselves against the enemy.
These structures will not stop any bullets flying at all. In terms of some of the shootings which were taking place, ultimately one had to work together to identify who was actually doing the shooting, because it was contrary to the
agent provocateurs.
They were provocateurs.
You're all still targets. You're all still trying to compromise one another and take out each other's agents in one form or another. Give us a sense of that time.
To me, it wasn't a paradox. We still monitored them.
And we did the same.
We still attempted to compromise their sources. We still attempted to embarrass them. I mean, many times I tried to embarrass Jeremy. Based on the profile which we had, he was a target.
You really get to know the other person in our work. You get to know that person. You get to know what those person's weaknesses are, what those person's strengths are. You get to know it.
If you're working with a person, you're having to rely on each other's competencies, you're engaging each other on a regular basis in terms of problem solving. Ultimately, friendships start developing as well. And I think that engagement was the precursor to what subsequently also became good friends in the process as well.
Generals can't become friends. Soldiers do.
Where the uniqueness of the experience with Jeremy came to the fore for me is with him having a child and me having children at that stage.
See this cute little baby.
No, you're laughing, man. I want to feel it.
What are the elements of fatherhood, which are absolutely sweet, nothing to do with our professional engagement?
I would never have imagined growing up in Elsies River myself ever being concerned about how his kid performs in swimming.
Jeremy and Gordon grew to respect one another's professionalism, and ultimately, out of this, a friendship developed. But it was at a cost. By becoming friends, they were also contaminating one another in the eyes of many mistrustful colleagues.
And we are pushing the limits in terms of what processes are involved, which I think as individuals makes us fairly controversial. It also makes it very isolating in one way, and also quite lonely in another way. And his isolation I can identify with. Mine, I'm sure he can identify with. And so we feed on each other's isolation in the end, in part. In some respects, I think that we have been criticized and continue to be criticized in terms of our professional engagement over issues, that from people who are bureaucrats, and we become condemned and vilified by some people within the organization as well.
Nobody has the guts to face this. Me, I know. Nobody has the guts to come to me and confront me.
The bottom line is, we're trying to understand who stoked the violence.
The motivation was not to come as to who stoked what initially, because it has such deep roots. It was who had the competency and capacity to actually stop it.
There's a point that is not coming through here. Even I should speak. Gordon doesn't represent the security forces in 1993. Understand that very, very clearly. His explanation.
Our interventions were, this is a problem, people are dying, can we make a difference? And sorted it out that way.
He took a hell of a lot of risks. And given the context you understand of the 90s, the early to mid-90s, it's a kind of a risk. So some people's warped interpretation is his environment could have got him killed. To have a counterintelligence investigation against you in that environment is not a bloody job. It's very intrusive. There is a tendency to neutralize you within your family environment, within every single environment, to destroy you, to prevent you from being a threat.
I made a choice, and the motivation for the choices I made will only sit comfortably with myself when and if my children understand why I made certain choices.
We went through a burning, bloody experience. You went through a cold one. I mean, it's mystical. I don't like to sound mystical at all. This poverty is the enemy here. This poverty is the enemy. I'm beginning to understand this chap like Mark, you know. Initially I thought, yeah, he was just another genteel guy who one can run circles around. But yeah, he seems to be getting to the point here.
Yeah, no,
You know?
the actual point is you are starting to find yourself within the point.
So what do the two of you feel? How are we going to end this documentary?
Why does there need to be some neatly packaged closure process at the end of this movie? I think people can learn something, a lot more through the fact that there are some issues that are still unresolved inside both individuals, and that's the reality. You know, it's... That's the end.
I don't think there is a clinical...
You're taking a slice of life out. It's a slice, literally. It's not a story with a neat little closed-off ending.